All right, everybody, thank you for joining us again. Please help me bring on the stage Badendrill and his discussion about Active Directory privilege escalation.
All right, so this is my very first talk ever, okay? So I'm a little nervous. So this is either I'm gonna blow through it in like 20 minutes or I'm gonna go way over. We don't know. I've got a bunch of slides, just a fun story, okay? So you hear the song that's playing, okay? This song is available on Spotify. It is the story that you're about to hear, okay? It was created and written and published before Microsoft fixed the bug. So, all right. So first, I have a disclaimer, and that is time is a flat circle. Okay. So, who am I? I am Justin Bollinger, also known as Bandrill. I work at TrustedSec as a principal consultant. I'm a pen tester. I've been pen testing for over 10 years. Before that, I was a network engineer. I did that for about 10 years. I'm not sure why this is still playing. It's a great song, but I don't need to play the whole time. Hold on. See, you always have some sort of... All right, I got it to stop, so we'll just start it from here. See, I would just... Oh, of course, I started from the beginning. Hold on. Playing current slide. There we go. All right. So I have contributed to multiple open source projects. One of them is a password cracking program called HateCrack. If you do any sort of password cracking, definitely go check that out. It's fun. The other project that I have contributed to is called CUCM. It's a nice little fun initial access for Cisco phone systems. So if you want a good story, check out my blog. The QR code here is just my bio on our website, so feel free to check that out. So the story I'm going to tell you is somewhat technical. I don't think it's technical, but my friends say that it's extremely technical, and since I met a bunch of students, I'm just going to assume everybody here's a student, okay? So some of the terms that we're going to use, public key infrastructure, okay? It's not going to come up much, but it's a term that encompasses all of the other terms, okay? Certificate authority. This is where the certificates are issued from, okay? I'm going to build out an analogy here for you because I think it's easier to understand the underlying vulnerability and kind of where I was at when I started the story. So like the information that I knew. So if you look at the state, right? So the state of Arizona, they provide the ability for you to validate your identity with other people. And the way they do that is they issue driver's licenses or state IDs, okay? So the certificate authority is kind of like the DMV. They're the ones that print that ID, okay? That ID, that's your certificate, okay? They're synonymous, right? So the certificate templates, that is the different forms that the DMV has for a moped license, for a CDL, for whatever kind of driver's license. So each individual application, each individual template has their own requirements. Like, what is the purpose for this certificate? What is the name? So do you have a commercial driver's license? Do you have that endorsement, right? But then also, what is your legal name? So when you provide that to somebody, because the state, you trust the state verified your identity, that you can trust the validity of that ID, okay? So the next piece is certificate signing request. This is that actual application that the template is based off of. So this is the form that's filled out that you present to the DMV in order for them to give you that ID, right? So this is the form that you fill out, give to the certificate authority, that then they give you the ID, okay? So the extended enhanced key usage, EKU, that's kind of like the endorsements, right? So this is, what is the purpose of this ID? What rights does it give you once the state grants it to you? Okay. So what is Active Directory Certificate Services? Now that you know all of that, it's just an AD integrated PKI, right? It's a way that you can manage end-to-end certificates that are integrated into Active Directory. And when I say integrated into Active Directory, what does that mean? Well, it means that Active Directory users trust those certificates. So it trusts anything that comes from it, right? So it assumes that they have the controls in place so that you can't just fill out that, you know, you're Bill Gates. And now I can go to the bank with an ID that says I'm Bill Gates, right? It's valid. It's signed by the state, right? So the only thing that links those things together is that name. But it's the trust that's provided with that CA that allows you to accept that that is valid. So in 2021, SpecterOps, they did some research. They came out with a white paper. Highly recommend it if this is your field of interest to read it. If you're a defender, definitely read it. If you're an attacker and you haven't read it, then I have some questions for you. It has become the #1 privilege escalation in pen testing Active Directory. It just, for the last couple of years, that's just how it has been. They came up with not just one, but in this white paper, they describe 8 different escalations. And the gist of them are what I just explained to you. The username field, because of the requirements of the organization, for whatever reason, has been left up to the submitter to supply what their name is. So if you think about it from the analogy of the DMV, you don't want people to be able to put whatever name they want on there, especially if you're not going to check. So there are some checks and balances that you can put in place. There is a require management approval, right? So it doesn't automatically issue the ID or the certificate. It goes into a pending state. And until somebody actually reviews it and accepts it, it doesn't get issued. So there are mitigations for this, right? So Microsoft doesn't consider it a vulnerability. They consider it a misconfiguration. So this is why it's so common, because this is why it's so our #1 trick that we use right now for privilege escalation, because Microsoft didn't fix it. They're not going to fix it. It's just how it works. That it's misconfigured, but you just find it misconfigured everywhere. So, okay. So in the SpecterOps blog, they go over some of the reasons, you know, why this is important. And I kind of described the domain escalation paths. But in addition, you have persistence. If that certificate is valid for, I don't know, a ridiculous amount of time, you know, 1+ years by default, then it doesn't matter if that user changes their password 100 times in that year, that certificate's still valid, because that certificate's valid until it's invalidated. Remember, we talked about I kind of glossed over it, but the certificate revocation list, that is the only way that you know a cert is no longer valid. That is because somebody manually went in there and said, something's wrong, it's been stolen, whatever, it's invalid, okay? Now, depending on how you're using the ID, right, there might be extra checks. So if you're using the certificate in, say, 802.1x for wireless or for wired authentication to the network, right, that may not even need to be an AD user, but many companies make it an AD user. And so as far as like all of the different issues that you could have, the domain escalation is probably the worst, right? And from the work that I do, the testing really is short term. So I really focus on, more the smash and grab than the espionage long-term projects. So, all right. So now we can get into the story. All right. So 4:30 in the morning, I'm working on an engagement with my buddy Nick Skeek. Okay. So we're working on it all week. This is, Friday. This is second to last day because, we're working night, so it's shifted a little bit. And we've got a foothold on the domain. We've got access to a single system in the entire environment, but we got nothing else. It's a bank. Our goal is to get access to the bank transfer systems, right? But we don't have access to anything but one system. So I just log in, start poking around, and I see what appears to be very similar to the escalation paths that SpecterOps describes in their white paper, in their blog. And so I think to myself, this isn't going to work, right? I ran the tools that did the checks, and they said that there was no vulnerabilities here. There's no misconfigurations here. I can't use it. I said, okay, well, sometimes the tools are wrong. I got nothing else to do. Let's just dig in, right? So I ended up finding something weird, and I'm going to show you in the next. I created this video. Doesn't have audio or anything, but it steps through a proof of concept of what I found that night. So this is what it looks like when you are requesting certificates within Active Directory, okay? This is under the context of the computer, okay? So when you are a local administrator to a computer, whether it's a workstation or a server, you also have access to the computer account. So when you have access to the computer account, not only can you access certificates and request certificate templates that your user has access to, here I can request certificates that the computer has access to. So if you see here, there's this little warning, right? More information is required. What that says is they want us to fill out the application. It's not going to be automatically filled out for you. So you remember the part about how you shouldn't let people fill in certain fields? This is the warning that says there's a certain field that needs to be filled in, okay? And by default, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So a web server template, there's no way that Active Directory can automagically figure out what you want that website to be, what the website's name is going to be, even what domain. It could be any domain, right? That doesn't really matter. So by default, they allow you to make changes. So the first change that you would make is like for the subject, right? Except for here, I'm not going to add a host name or domain name. I'm going to add administrator. And instead of a DNS name, I'm going to add a UPN, user principal name. Okay? So that doesn't make sense for a web server certificate at all, right? It wouldn't work as a web server. But that's not what I was doing. So this is what a manual ESC1 escalation does. So once I got to the next page, I noticed something strange here too. The fields here, where all of the available options, they're grayed out now because nothing's highlighted. But you can select them. So this could be a UI bug. It might not be a UI bug. You know what? It's 4:30 in the morning. I got nothing else to do. Let's just throw stuff up against the wall and see if anything sticks. Okay? So I'm like, you know what? I don't want server authentication. I want client authentication. Shouldn't be able to do that. I'm like, well, we're at it. I'll make it exportable. Why not? Which I didn't need to. I just would have to add malware to the system, and I didn't want to. So All right, so now I have a certificate that is issued to administrator. Okay, well, it's signed by the organization. Well, that's not good. But it's okay because the purpose is wrong, right? It's a web server template. Shouldn't allow you to do client auth. Oops, skipped the end of that. Man. I think that's pretty much just showing you how the process of exporting. But this is the video that I sent to Microsoft, the exact video. It is 1 minute and 30 seconds, okay? So keep that in mind. This is something, it would only take 1 minute and 30 seconds to watch, okay? I gave that same video to a colleague of mine. He was able to completely duplicate the vulnerability in less than 15 minutes, okay? So, once I have this cert, I am able to use a tool called CertiPy, publicly available, okay? This is the tool that all the pen testers use, okay? So the first step is just because you can't export without a password and CertiPy can't use something with a password. So the first step is just stripping out the password, okay? The second step is then to try and authenticate to the domain, except when I tried it the first time, the normal way that you do it is a process called PK and knit, okay? PK and knit allows you to take that certificate with that name and then request a Kerberos ticket. Kerberos is the process that Active Directory uses on the back end in order to authenticate different users for different services, et cetera. So because you can use a certificate and the only thing required is you have the username in the CN field, you can then authenticate to Active Directory with that. You not only can authenticate to Active Directory, but then you can take that Kerberos ticket and you can extract the NTLM hash and then potentially crack it and then potentially get the plain text password, right? All because you had a certificate with the name on it that matched a user, any user. Because when you have the ability to fill it out, you can fill it out to be whatever you want. So initially I tried that and it didn't work, right? And I thought to myself, well, I tried, right? You can't win every time. You don't win every time. But then I remembered a blog that talked about SChannel and LDAP. And it didn't have the same requirements as PKNet. And I noticed that even though this cert was a server auth certificate and not a client auth cert, that if I used it with past the cert technique to LDAP, it would allow me to authenticate as the user to LDAP. So from there, I was able to just add a low privilege user to the domain admins group. Not highly sophisticated, very OPSEC unaware, right? Don't actually do that if you're a pen tester. That's just to prove a concept. But I gave this screenshot to Microsoft, okay? So taking a deep dive into looking at the actual certificate, I noticed that there was still extended key usage, was server authentication, which it should be, which is fine, right? But I also noticed something else. So you remember how it was extended and enhanced? Like there's both terms. Why is there both terms? Well, so those terms come from two different places. The first place, all the way back early 2000s, probably, maybe late 90s, a bunch of people smarter than me decided to create a standard called X509, and it describes all of the different properties and how certificates work, okay? So if you ever get bored, read RFCs, they're great. Well, in that RFC, they describe this OID, which is like a string of numbers that describes this specific field, and they call it extended key usage. So that extended key usage became a standard across the board. Microsoft, being Microsoft, likes to be difficult, and so they decided they would come up with their own enhanced key usage, not to be confused with the extended key usage, and it was a Microsoft proprietary extension, but it used the same OID to not confuse people. But because there was a conflict, and you could put both properties in certificates, one of them has to win. So the Microsoft proprietary one obviously should be the preferred extension, except for we're 20 years in the future. Nobody used that proprietary extension. If you look up stuff, you'll find one guy that did research on this. I ended up meeting him because I sent him my blog and we chatted about things. And yeah, the area of application policies, completely foreign. So I noticed something in there as well that was application policies. This is that proprietary extension that I mentioned. And so I looked and I said, okay, what is this? I had never seen it before. That's when I learned that through this guy's blog that there's like an order of operations of which is accepted. And then I realized, well, if I'm able to shove both of these in there and the Microsoft one's preferred, then at least for SChannel, I can authenticate as whoever I want. I have a new escalation point. And so I decided to contact Microsoft. Okay? Before that, every great vulnerability needs a name, right? So I went on Twitter, started soliciting for names, and a buddy of mine named Trevor came up with EKUwu. So the song that originally you heard during the title sequence, that is by a band called Uwu Underground, okay? So they have a bunch of songs. They're mostly trash-talking security vendors. But I just happen to know them. I don't know them personally. I don't know who they are, so don't ask. They're kind of like Daft Punk, where they wear their, or Gorillas, where they have their online anime personas, but like their real names. Anyway, so I reached out to them and I said, hey, I got this. It's called Uwu. How funny would that be if when I released my proof of concept video, if you guys wrote a song for it, right? And they're like, okay, that's not the thing that we do, so we're not going to do it. But then I told them the whole story, the rest of the story you're about to hear, and that's when they decided that they were going to write a song. So the entire song, they had access to the blog, and I told them about the details of the vulnerability, so they were able to publish the song. It's really fun. So Microsoft, I contact them. Originally, I think, hey, this is a problem with SChannel, right? Because it didn't work in PKInit. So it must be a problem just with SChannel. The SChannel is not checking the right thing. It's checking the proprietary thing that shouldn't be because nobody uses it, right? And Microsoft did one extra thing, right? Application, who here does anything with Azure or Entra, right? Does application policy sound familiar? That's not what we're talking about here. This is something completely different. They just reuse the name, okay? Just so we're clear. All right. So I decided that until Microsoft responded, I was going to just shitpost on Twitter, as one does. So I started memeing, okay? The meme started out innocent. It was also Labor Day weekend. So I was like, all right, this is too much, right? I was like, why didn't somebody tell me that responsible disclosure is so agonizing when you could tweet out a single tweet and watch everyone's holiday disappear, right? So of course, somebody replied to me. I don't remember exactly what the response was. It was something funny. So I responded back, F it. Here's a POC, right? But when you actually dug down into it, it was just base 64 twice right? Because you can't just base 64 something once, right? Because if somebody decodes that and they get a blob, they're not gonna not decode the second time, right? So the second time, it was this Rickroll, right? I really upset this guy. Yeah, so I got this. You know, I will not drop a 0 day on a holiday weekend, right? So time went by. I believe it was eventually 40 days before Microsoft even acknowledged that they were able to reproduce it. Now remember, I gave that video to them 40 days prior. I gave that same video to my coworker who was able to duplicate it in his lab in 15 minutes. So I was working with a couple other people, and we were discussing some things, and I didn't realize something. When you can supply your own OID, you can do things like enrollment agent. So ESC1, it's the go-to vulnerability or misconfiguration, escalation, whatever you want to call it. It's the go-to, but it has a very unique tell. And that is, you know, the person requested it and the person who's in it, those names don't match, right? Because you're forging your own name in a certificate that the name shouldn't be in that certificate. Well, ESC3, which is one of those original escalations, I just don't see it in the wild very often, so I didn't click. You can do something called enrollment agent. So what an enrollment agent does is it's a special kind of cert that's issued to the person who requests it. So again, there's no mismatch. There's just this extra OID, and then that cert can be used to authenticate to the cert system with special privileges that allows it to request certs on behalf of other users. And again, those certs also don't look funny. They're normal. This is a normal process. So there's no mismatch. There's no nothing there. Okay? But then it got even worse, right? So this screenshot shows you the weaponized CertiPy that was developed in order for us to do the testing, okay? There's still a fork out there with this, but essentially you're able to go through the steps of, the first step is requesting that original certificate that has, you know, from the web server template that has that extra application policy attached to it. And that string of numbers, that OID, that is specific to the enrollment agent, okay? So each different type has a different OID. So if it's a client auth cert, that number will be different. If it is a web server auth, that number will be different. That is what makes a cert different, right? Is those OIDs, okay? The next step is that request of a certificate for the administrator account, okay? And then the third is actually two steps in one. It's just one command. You auth with that certificate to a domain controller, and it gives you the account's NTLM hash. So if you know anything about AD, you know that that's really bad because there's a thing called pass the hash. You don't have to crack that. So that could be 64 random characters. It doesn't matter how secure the password is. Once you have that hash, you can authenticate as that user, okay? But then it got worse. What about code signing, right? If we can supply any OID that we want, or any application policy that we want, rather, then instead of supplying the subject, we can supply the EKU, right? Now we can do code signing certs. That's not good, right? Meanwhile, Microsoft still hasn't responded. We're still within that 40-day window. I'm updating them in real time. Every time I make a discovery, I tell them. Still no response. So I'm like, all right, more shit posting. I signed calc.exe. Okay. It's signed by totally legit security vendor. Okay, I use the web server template, and I upload it to VirusTotal. And then I tweet about it, kind of give breadcrumbs of how to find it. But I'm trying to show proof that this is a real thing and somebody needs to pay attention to me, right? I'm a principal consultant at a major security vendor. I can't imagine somebody without the connections that I have navigating this. But you know what? It's fine. Okay. So it turns out sub-CAs don't actually work because they're not part of that application policy. It's a basic constraint. Technical detail, that's the only thing that saved it from that. But it doesn't matter because we have enrollment agent. We can just request certs from the real CA for anybody that we want. So it doesn't matter that, you know, we can't sign our own stuff, probably not. They still hadn't even issued me a case manager, okay? I hadn't talked to a real person yet. So, of course, I tweet more, right? And eventually, I do hear back, right? So the initial date that I started this whole adventure was August 30th, right? It was right before Labor Day weekend. September 18th, I finally get a message that says, we want to meet this Friday, September 20th. Does anyone want to guess whether or not that meeting happened? Okay. So, and I start tweeting more like, hey, you guys, I got something here. Pay attention to me. I get the response, and they're like, how can we assist? I give them the case ID. I've been able to duplicate it. I just want somebody to acknowledge that somebody's going to actually talk to me about this, or I'm just going to publish a blog, you know? But then something happened. There was a pull request released with the weaponized exploit of this. Right? That same code that I showed you earlier that we were using to testing, it was somebody that I was working with, okay? We were aware, he was aware that we were talking with Microsoft. There was some miscommunication. Anyway, if you want to read the whole dramatic, you can look up the pull request. But you can see that it's closed, okay? Because Microsoft did fix it, so it kind of made his code moot. So karma's, So I released a blog the next day, because that weaponized exploit didn't contain any defensive information. That's not cool with me. So I did what I thought was right, and I published basically this talk without some of the color commentary. And it discussed defensively, what do you need to do to prevent you to, you know, protect yourself from this? Because Microsoft hadn't even acknowledged it yet. So they had acknowledged it to me, and I'm trying to think if I have, okay, so I don't have the screenshot from the blog, but there is a screenshot that I included in the blog that is the response that I got from Microsoft. And it said, this is a default config, or this is not a default config. It's not a vulnerability. We're not going to fix it. Now, I hadn't talked to anybody in person before, right? So finally, I get them on the phone. The call scheduled for, it was, I think, a Wednesday. And I thought this was it, but maybe this is a totally different meeting. So I'm sorry for not double checking the date. But it was, oh no, okay, so it was October 9th, yeah. So I just received it on the 3rd. My bad. So I had a meeting with Microsoft on Wednesday. The exploit had gotten dropped on a Monday, that Monday. And then I released my blog on Tuesday. So the following day after releasing my blog is when I had the meeting with Microsoft, okay? Beginning of the call, Microsoft is still on the, we're not gonna fix it, it's not an issue, it's not a default config. So I'm going through all of the different scenarios about how bad this is and all of the things that we could do, because the implications of code signing certs probably didn't really hit on most of you. So code signing certs, it's a way to sign your software that you run internally that you develop so that you know that it's trustworthy because you signed it. So because of that, antivirus, EDR, whitelisting, they all go, oh, it's signed by the organization? No further questions, right? So what about malware, right? So as a red teamer, I can just sign malware. It's going to bypass all these security controls because it doesn't matter. Not only that, I can then fill out whatever username I want. I have creds to everything. I have persistence forever, because until you manually invalidate that first certificate that I got that doesn't even look suspicious, you can change all the passwords in the domain and I still have full access. So they still said it's not an issue. So I coined a term called the MSRC paradox. And in discussing with other people, this has been their same experience. So if you bring something to Microsoft looking for the goal of a bounty, then you have to abide by their rules, okay? However, you're not going to get a bounty because they're not going to give you a CVE. They're not going to give you a bounty unless they give you a CVE, and they're not going to give you a CVE if they don't have to, okay? It's not important. It's not an issue, even though I'm telling them it's an issue, okay? Through the research that I had 70% of the clients that I tested had this non-default config. So for them to tell me that it's not a default config, it's not an issue, we're not going to fix it, I had to bend over backwards. And so I go into, okay, well, what is a standard default config? Okay, a domain admin can use this template, can do the exact same thing. It's no longer a privileged escalation, but a domain admin should not be able to generate a code signing cert with a web server template. And I'm told that domain admin can just create a code signing template, so it's not an issue. Okay, but the act of using the template for one purpose and getting another purpose is the issue. Still nothing. So then I said, okay, well, did you see the blog? Did you read thoroughly through the blog that I published yesterday? And I got, what blog? And I said, the blog that I emailed you yesterday, right? And I explained the whole weaponization and how it was published and how I reactively published the blog. And they said, oh, hold on, give me a minute. And then everything changed. I also disclosed a couple clients that were in that list of 70%. And I think that may have had something to do with it, but needless, they were big names. They weren't just small businesses. They were Fortune 100, right? So I finally got the CVE, and with that I got stickers, right? But no bounty, because they have rules for bounty. So I ended up having a lessons learned with MSRC, specifically with the bounty people and with the case manager. And they wanted to know, how my experience went and wanted some feedback. So I gave them some candid feedback. But they told me the rules, right? Some things that I learned about the CVE process. Microsoft is in full control of everything, right? If they don't want to issue a CVE, they're not going to issue a CVE. I went to IBM because I have friends and colleagues in IBM, right? They tried to submit for a CVE for me. through IBM, because IBM is also a CNA. However, a CNA is the registering authority for CVEs numbers. So there's special rules. If you are a CNA, you can't issue CVEs for other CNAs. So this is a way that the purpose of it is so that one, say Apple and Microsoft, right? Apple can't just make up stuff to make Microsoft look bad and vice versa. So the only people that can issue CVEs for Microsoft are Microsoft and MITRE. MITRE, that's where it's like, well, we have a fallback plan and that's MITRE, right? But this is kind of like self-reported security, right? So if they don't see that it's an issue, they can just determine that it's not an issue. And then this is an issue that had been there for 20 years, right? I don't know what kind of campaigns I may have disrupted if this was something that was actually being used, because I just stumbled on it. I didn't find it, right? But because I stumbled on it and it wasn't being abused, it wasn't an issue to them. So anyway, any questions? I am okay. I told them that I probably would not submit another bug to them, because to me, it came down to either I get a CVE or I don't. It's a win-win for me, because I get a CVE, it's a win, I get a talk, okay? I don't get a CVE, I get the ultimate skeleton key that works at 70% of organizations, right? Except for that's a skeleton key that works at 70%. That's, with great power comes great responsibility that I don't want, okay? So I didn't want it to get into some script kiddie ransomware gang and have them just wreck the world, right? So that's why I kept pushing on them. It wasn't about the money. It was about making the world a safer place. So I'm not terribly upset about the money. It makes for a good story. And it also exposes a lot of the weird things, the weird politics that you would never know about unless you actually got into it. And so some of you are probably wondering, well, what kind of money are we talking here? Like $500 bounty? No, we're talking like $10,000 to $30,000 bounty that was out. So if you want a bounty, here are my recommendations. Don't talk to anyone at all. Coworkers, nothing, okay? Because you can't talk to a single person. And the reason that I told Microsoft that I will never submit for a bounty, because I can never follow their rules. Because one of their rules is you can't talk to anyone. I'm a consultant. I found that at a bank. I can't tell the bank. That doesn't fly with me. So because that, I will never receive a bounty and I'm okay with it. But I will also make sure that everybody knows that you're also not going to get a bounty, because that's just the game that they play. So that was my experience. That's my story. I think we're about out of time anyway. So if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them. Hope it wasn't too technical. Everybody understand the, okay, good. All right. Thanks, everyone.